What's going on, everyone? My name is Jasmine. On today's episode of the Slain Project, we're going to be talking about the 1986 murder and decapitation of 22-year-old Jamie Thunderhawk. Now, this video is going to discuss domestic violence, so if you are sensitive to this topic, I suggest that you skip over this video. I'm also going to leave some links down below for domestic violence resources if you need help escaping a domestic violence situation. And if you want to see more videos on missing and murdered Indigenous people, click that subscribe button and the notification bell. Now let's get right into it. Jamie Thunderhawk was 22 years old and a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe and was married to a man named Elvis Thunderhawk. His parents were from the Cheyenne River Sioux and Pine Ridge reservations. From what I could tell, he was about 6 or 7 years older than her. Growing up, Jamie was in foster care and was placed in the care of a white family. It has been stated she lost connection with her biological family, and this experience and broken connection would have devastating effects on her life. Elvis had been in and out of trouble with the law many times and had done numerous bids in jail and in prison. In between one of these times, he met and married Jamie, and they had 2 children together. Elvis had gotten himself into trouble again and was sentenced to 3 years in prison for a forgery conviction. At some point, Jamie and Elvis's children were placed in foster care in Rapid City before they were moved to the care of Elvis's mom. By this time, it was 1986, and Jamie was living in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Elvis was serving his time in prison. Jamie had tried going to treatment a couple times for alcoholism. She desperately wanted to get her life in order and get a stable job to get her children back. With no relatives or support system, she kept falling into the cycle of alcoholism and became prone to abusive relationships. Jamie was a regular patron at a bar called the Frontier Club, located at the time at 318 North Main Street. She became friends with the bartenders and other patrons at the bar. She also ran across men at the bar who were only interested in one thing. One time at the bar, she left with a man who later tried to strangle her with her own blouse. Another time, she left in a taxi with a man and took some money from him before she hopped out of the taxi. He chased her down, beat her, and ripped her clothes off. But Jamie would eventually cross paths with a 33-year-old man named David Bradley. He was an alcoholic and a very violent person. Jamie's roommate, Judy Ebright, and several people from the bar would later recall how abusive David was to Jamie. They said Jamie would often have bruises and burn marks from cigarettes. David would also beat her with the phone receiver if she tried to make calls from the bar. Jamie had long, beautiful hair, and one day in May 1986, she came in with short, choppy hair. She was asked what happened, and she said David had cut her hair with a butcher's knife and said that her neck would be next. Many people have recalled how David would often say he would take her head off when he was angry with her. Many people encouraged Jamie to leave him, but she could not escape him. Jamie was afraid of David, and his control over her was overpowering. Her husband Elvis was still in prison and was aware of the relationship. He believed she stayed because she had no one else to turn to. Elvis loved Jamie very much, and David was very jealous of him. Jamie had a tattoo on her leg that said Elvis's name. One time when he was angry, David burnt over the tattoo with a cigarette. The abusive relationship was already bad, but it was about to get much worse. Jamie had a job as a nurse's assistant and was required to wear a white uniform and white shoes. On Sunday, July 22, 1986, Jamie came home and her roommate Judy said she was crying. Jamie said that David had drugged her around and taken her shoes. I am not sure who called the police, but they were contacted and David was charged with robbery for taking the $7 pair of shoes. Robbery is a serious charge, and the maximum penalty in South Dakota is 25 years in prison. David denied he had taken the shoes, and Jamie had to borrow another pair to continue working. Judy said that the shoes showed up anonymously after 3 or 4 days, but the charges did not go away. Around this time in late July, Jamie moved out of Judy's home, and this was the last time Judy ever saw her. David Bradley lived with a woman named Barbara Coy and 2 other friends, 36-year-old Vernon Lilligard and 41-year-old Darryl Davids. On the night of Monday, August 11, 1986, David Bradley and Jamie were arguing over the robbery charges stemming from the white work shoes outside the apartment he shared with his friends in Sioux Falls. David had pushed Jamie and she fell and hit her head on the steps. He then began to kick her with his cowboy boots, and by this time she was unconscious. David dragged her inside the apartment while Vern held the door open. Then David began to sexually assault Jamie while she was still knocked out. She awoke and yelled for him to get off her. According to Vern, this is when David started to strangle her to death. Darryl Davids was supposedly still outside when all this happened, and he only became involved after Jamie was dead. Her body was placed in the trunk of his car right after her murder. It remained there overnight and into the next day, when the trio of friends decided to drive to Baltic, South Dakota on Tuesday, August 12, 1986. They were driving on Ditch Road when they pulled over to urinate about a half-mile north of the town of Renner. This is where David decided to dump Jamie's body. He retrieved her from the trunk and then used an 18-inch knife to saw her head off. Vernon and Darryl began to vomit, and David just laughed. He said, "This is one dirty, stinking fucking Indian that won't bother me anymore." He beat the head with a tire iron before throwing it, her body, and a pair of her jeans in a waterlogged ditch. He threatened his friends that if they told anyone, the same thing would happen to them. The remains of Jamie would lay there in the summer heat for about 3 weeks before being discovered by 2 mushroom harvesters on Thursday, September 4th, 1986. The time of the discovery was at about 6:30 p.m. The men called for help, and the area was swarmed with police. Homicide detectives wanted a thorough evaluation of the crime scene, so it was decided to place a guard at the scene until daylight hours arrived the next morning. Trees and bushes around the body were cut so that good photographs could be taken. It was noted that the body was nude, the head was lying a few feet away from the body, and there was a pair of jeans nearby. The water-filled ditch and hot summer sun paired with natural decomposition made it impossible to determine the exact cause and time of death. But the medical examiner was able to tell that Jamie's head had been severed post-mortem. Jamie's identification card was in the pocket of the jeans, and detectives began to follow this lead. She was positively identified as being the decapitated corpse on Friday, September 5th, 1986. This was confirmed by dental records. Detectives soon learned of Jamie's abusive relationship with David Bradley. The woman he stayed with, Barbara Coy, said that she had inquired about Jamie in mid-August, and David simply said that she wouldn't be bothering them anymore. Barbara handed over David's cowboy boots to detectives when they began investigating him. This angered him, and he told her to stop talking to them. And without being prompted, he told Barbara that his boots had gotten wet. Barbara went on to later say that David's behavior changed around the time Jamie was murdered. He didn't drink as much and he stayed home more. He spoke of Jamie less often than usual, which was weird because he was very controlling over her. David Bradley was brought in for questioning on Saturday, September 6, 1986. He was not read his Miranda rights because he was not officially arrested or detained. David admitted to being violent towards Jamie and that he cut her hair off with a butcher's knife. He would eventually be charged with first-degree murder, and his friends Vernon and Darryl would be charged with accessory to murder. The horrific details about David and Jamie's relationship came out during the trial. Because the bar Jamie hung out at, the Frontier Club, was known to police for its rowdy crowd and prostitution, In and around the area of the bar, David Bradley's lawyer tried to dehumanize Jamie by asking a witness if she was a prostitute. However, the judge did not allow this. There was no evidence that Jamie was a prostitute, and I also believe she was not because she was working a regular civilian job around the time she was murdered. Vern stated on the stand at the time of the murder he was supposed to take medication for manic depression, but did not take it because he was drinking heavily. The murder seemed so unreal to him because it was so horrific, but he knew that all the details he described really did happen. He went on to say that he was back on his medication and that his mind was clear. Vernon Lilligard and Darryl Davids agreed to testify against David Bradley in exchange for a plea deal. This lowered their offense from accessory to murder to misprision of a felony, which means they knew of a serious crime and did not report it. They were both sentenced to 1 year with credit for time served, and the balance was a suspended sentence. David Bradley was found guilty of first-degree murder on April 3, 1987, after the jury deliberated for 14 hours. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He received a sentence of life without parole and was put into protective custody over fears of retaliation by the native inmates in prison. His charges for robbery over taking Jamie's work shoes were dropped after her murder. He tried unsuccessfully to appeal his conviction on 2 separate occasions. He cited reasons such as his roommates were accomplices instead of witnesses, and that his prior abuse towards Jamie was inadmissible. He also complained that he was not read his Miranda rights when he was first questioned, but it was noted that he was not being detained and was free to leave whenever he wanted. David died of natural causes at the South Dakota State Penitentiary in March 2022. He was 68 years old. Elvis Thunderhawk wrote a letter to the newspaper from prison and encouraged any women going through domestic violence to reach out for help. He was deeply disturbed by his wife's murder and wanted to do anything he could to prevent this from happening to someone else. He went on to have more children and passed away in 2016 from a drug overdose at age 58. Jamie Thunderhawk experienced the worst that life has to offer. I hope that she is resting peacefully and that she somehow knows that she is not forgotten. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you knew Jamie, please share any memories of her, and I will see you in my next video.